Okay, great. Thank you. So here we would like to talk about an extension of Allotrope Foundation Ontology. This talk will be given by, the first part will be mainly me, and the second part will be mainly Wes from Merck. So this research has been funded by Merck for 1 year pilot study to our Michigan, and yeah, I'm basically implementing the work. This work is on how we can possibly use ontologies to present and analyze process chemistry. So we will introduce the importance of the content, and then we are going to talk about the scope of process chemistry, and then we will survey the existing ontologies and terminologies, and then eventually, after we have done all the survey, then we found that maybe it's time to propose an ontology specifically for process chemistry, because such a thing has not existed yet. And then we will introduce how we can develop the so-called ontology of process chemistry, the OPC, our strategy and the methodology, and upper level, and some design patterns. And then Wes will give 2 use cases. One is the FATE and the Purge, another one is DoE, the design of experiment. And we are going to also give some our definitions, and in the end, we are going to summary and the discussion. So first of all, the project definitely is important, right? In our process chemistry field, we are going to have a lot of analytical data. And meanwhile, we are going to have the synthesis parameters. And then each of them individually, they are not enough. They are not considered as complete data. So we have to merge them in order to make a complete data. But often it's not easy to do, right? How you can merge, how you can standardize, how you can analyze them. And we do need some language to do so. Okay. And then here we share that we have some entry-level standardization that can be done. Let me see. Yeah, so that can be done using ontology. So for example, in practical, we have different certains, like 3 certains. And in the end, we want to analyze them together. However, in reality, the different certains, even the label, like the simple way to do is like they give different row number, like a batch number or lot, right? So those things are not synthesized. So, or maybe they can be synthesized by link to the something ontology ID, but we need to do so. Also, it's simple. So by doing the ontology level standardization, then we can make the tags which are not semantically enabled now become semantically enabled, and then we can eventually provide standardized data labels or map to the standard data labels, and then we can also link to the enduring definitions and machine readable semantics, and also have a lot of other semantic applications. So we are thinking about the whole process chemistry life cycle. So typically we think the 3 major processes. One is round scouting, one is process optimization, one is process maintenance. And under each one, there are many categories. And we here list a few, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We list a few categories, and we think that those things are important for us to do modeling and analyzing. And then with this background, then we see, okay, if there are any ontologies available for the process chemical terms. And then we look at the OBO foundry. So OBO means Open Biomedical Ontology. And so they are all aligned with BFO. So it's Basic Formal Ontology. So BFO is a top-level ontology which has been now recently accepted as ISO standard. So it's ISO top-level ontology. And there are over 300 ontologies that have been aligned with BAFO. And the AFO also is aligned with BAFO, so it's a perfect fit for us to choose those ontologies that are all aligned with BAFO. And then we look at the OBO foundry, and you can find many ontologies, as listed here, many ontologies somehow dealing with process chemistry, like chemical compounds, like chemical methods, organic reaction unit drugs, and proteins. Those somehow related to process chemistry. But however, there's no single integrative, comprehensive ontology that is for process chemistry alone, right? So as we see, we have a lot to do with process chemistry, as you see in the previous slides, but there's none in OBO to do so. Then we look back into vocabularies and terminologies. So there are two process chemistry vocabularies which are famous and popular. So one is the Pistoia, formerly Elsevier. They have the unified data models. And then we have ISA ATA. So they are dealing with different parts of the process chemistry. They provide vocabularies. And then we have the Allotrope foundation ontology, so AFO. So AFO covers some results pertinent to process chemistry, and it covers derivation, which parallels organic synthesis. However, it's not focused on process chemistry, and it's not systematic there. And the vocabularies are not ontology. So, and then if we look for the publications, we see some overall publications. They provide some general ideas and maybe some simple demo, but yeah, there is no really ontology yet with a focus on the domain of process chemistry. So overall, our thorough survey found no complete ontologies that focus on the domain of process chemistry, a major branch of pharmaceutical chemistry. So in the end, we discussed a lot, like Wes and I, we have discussed a lot, and we would like to propose something called OPC, which is Ontology of Process Chemistry. So PCO has been taken for another namespace, so we just want to be different, so we call it OPC. So we would like to think it's a new ontology with a focus on the domain of process chemistry. So it will cover the entire timeline from the route scouting to reaction optimization to process maintenance. So we provide some example components of the proposed OPC, including reaction kinetics and mechanism, polymorphism, additional material roles like surfactants, different roles, and then key reaction types like additions, eliminations, etc., and unit operations such as filtering, refluxing, findings. So some of the terms may come from other ontologies, but we like to put all together and fill up major gaps. And then the strategy we want to follow is, we call it extensible ontology development strategy. So basically, it will include term reuse, alignment, design pattern. So if the terms are already there from existing ontologies, we are going to import, and all the terms together will be aligned together with the buffer. And then for new terms, we are going to design new design patterns, which will be consistent with the community, with AFO. And then we're going to use the design pattern to to add new terms. And of course, the community extensibility is important. We want to make it more like open source and community build up ontology. And we will follow the OBO foundry ontology development principles and Allotrope foundation ontology style guide. So eventually we want to use it not only aligned with Buffalo, its up-down design, but also bottom-up design to analyze different use cases and different specific questions like common operations, basic reaction patterns, and use cases based on workflow. So here I want to give some more specifics. So this is a top-down level design. So Buffalo basically has two major branches. One is continuing branch, one is a current branch. So continuing branch basically is a time-independent entities. So all these are time-independent. So the current one is time-dependent. So everything is associated with time or process. So you can see many terms here we borrowed from Buffalo or some other ontologies like CABI for chemical entity. But we also included some new OPC terms like the synthetic chemical process. You have three branches around the scouting, process optimization, and the process maintenance. And then we are looking for process profiles, like a critical process profile in synthetic process, like example temperature profile. And then we can look for the quality and the information data, and we can put it all together. Okay, so here is one example. What about chemical process, right? So the major one will be the synthetic chemical process. So in our modeling, so it's a process. And then this process will have specific input, right? The starting material, intermediate material, chemical impurity, and then has output, chemical impurity and chemical process. They are all material entities. And then we can also have subclasses of the synthetic chemical process, like a commercial synthetic process. And then we are going to link also those chemical products into, it's more like a regulatory quality, like the critical quality attribute. So all the things will be linked together in a very systematic, semantic way. And then what about unit operation? So this is a simple model here. So again, let's come from the synthetic chemical process. It has a different occurrent part, right? Like a temperature measurement, stirring, inserting material. And each of those will have different profiles, like a process profile. And then now we have data. Data will be generated during the whole process. So each profile will have data, like a 2D data of temperature profile, or the 2D data of stirring profile, etc. And those data will be somehow now linked with the reality, with the process. So, and we can use the reality, the process ontology to explain the data and put all that together. So yeah, next I will let Wes go through the other cases. Wes?
Sure, thanks, Oliver. So I'm going to talk about how we've begun vetting the workflows introduced in the scope slide earlier to build the ontology from the bottom up. So after identifying scientific SMEs who are experts in the particular workflow, we ask them to identify key published resources such as review articles and book chapters that give detailed accounts of the workflow. We then parse the terms from these resources, typically 2 to 4, often simply by just highlighting the terms in the article. Then we survey the existing ontologies and vocabularies to see if they've been addressed elsewhere. the found terms, we go back and get an initial evaluation by the scientific SME, and also review them semantically to make sure that the definitions are rigorous. Since the overall driver for this work is to link the analytical data to its experimental context, we want to make sure that any terms that we develop facilitate this. So any inconsistencies with the AFO or the higher level BFO ontology are flagged to be addressed. Finally, if there is a gap, we build a bare bones CMAP of the term and its connection to existing AFO terms based on ADM patterns to facilitate the semantic term definition. We also find that this CMAP, this bare bones CMAP, is the best representation of the formal ontology definition for review by the scientific SMEs. Now we'll briefly look at two examples of how we're going to do this. Oliver, if you can click to the next slide. So the first use case is a DoE study. For those of you who are not familiar with DoE studies, they're basically boundary testing of important processing parameters to determine the ranges of those parameters that produce a quality product. These studies are expected by the regulatory agencies in filings for new drugs, so all pharma companies do these. DoE studies in particular are predefined and statistically sound studies to ensure the processing space is adequately covered. Preliminary work includes determining what the key processing parameters are and what the important analytical indicators of quality and economics will be. It's different from one variable at a time studies because DoE studies deliberately change multiple variables at a time to tease out the interdependencies between the process parameters, or factors as they're called in DoE. Factorial designs are often used to do this. A full factorial design is shown in the center bottom there. If you look at the three example factors, it's very reasonable to assume that the reaction temperature and the addition rate could affect the optimal reaction time. And a hypothetical response then is shown on the right that shows this dependency. Typically, multiple response curves must be examined to define the design space or the safe operating zone of the process. Examples could be overall purity, levels of individual impurities, or process yield. They are often defined in the AFO or tied directly to analytical terms in the AFO. Next slide, please. So as an example here, we'll use the concept of design experiment itself. We didn't find that defined in any of the BFO aligned ontologies. So a simple CMAP is drawn, showing how the new term is related to other terms, its place in the taxonomy is determined, how it's distinguished from its sibling classes, and then the key relationships to other concepts form the ontology. So in this case, the design of experiment is a planned process that have factors as inputs and a design space as output. We don't show it here, but the individual response curves are also outputs of the DoE, and those response curves connect directly to the analytical data modeled by the AFO. Next slide. The second exemplary workflow is a fate and purge study. As the name implies, a fate and purge study determines the fate of an impurity in a synthetic process. Again, these studies are expected by the regulatory agencies. As an example, we look at the crystallization process on the lower left. The material input to the process contains a certain level of impurities. The crystallization is then used to obtain a purity upgrade by preferentially precipitating the desired product as a crystalline solid, leaving the bulk of the impurity in the supernatant solution. In the center, we represent that the determination of the total amount of impurity in the waste and product streams is complicated by the fact that the impurity itself can be altered by the process. So you have to account for all the degradants of the impurity as well. Quantitation of the impurity and its degradant are directly addressed by the AFO. Finally, in the bottom right, multi-step processes further complicate things, as impurities and or their degradants can persist through multiple steps, if not the whole process. These branched and bifurcated processes are easily modeled using graph technology. Next slide, please. So here are 4 example terms from the Fate and Purge example workflow. As an example, we're just going to look at the definition of the purge factor term. Again, we didn't find this term in any of the BFO ontologies, so we make a small CMAP representation of the definition that the chemist gave us. It's then encoded into a machine readable definition. And here, Protege, which is an ontology visualization tool, it's showing the machine readable definition that was developed for the purge factor. And it's a process property that describes the fraction of an impurity in the waste stream over the amount remaining in the processing stream. So next slide, please. So although the goal of this work is to develop a process chemistry ontology, not to necessarily model all of the process chemistry workflows, we did want to make sure that the ontology was detailed enough to support representing our process data in a cloud graph environment. So we did a pressure test based on reaction kinetics. So we basically attempted to model a series of experiments, and this is a portion of that. The terms that we developed as part of the initial vetting process, we did find them to be enough to express the experiments and the results. The rate equation and its components are all expressible using existing BFO, AFO terms, as well as the new ontology terms. Again, this is only a small portion of it, but we also modeled all of the links from the 2D data profiles that you would collect to get kinetics data back to the original data represented by the AFO. Okay, and then with that, I'll turn the presentation back to Oliver.
Okay, thank you, Wes, for the introduction of the cases and the pressure test. So now we want to summarize the work. So we have done a thorough survey on the process chemistry ontology. We notice its importance, but however, there is no comprehensive ontology on it. So we propose to develop the so-called OPC, and then to focus on the process chemistry. And we also presented our developmental strategy, the methods, and we provided our up-level design and design pattern. And then we have 2 use cases and a pressure test presented. So, and we want to see OPC has maintained its interoperability with the Allotrope foundation ontologies, and it's natural, right? Because we all aligned with BFO. And the whole OPC development just begun. We spent 2 things we presented, but the testing cases have just started. So we welcome others who are interested to participate. So we like to discuss a couple of things. One major one is the status of OPC. So the ontology of chemistry or process chemistry as OPC. So will it be a standalone ontology, or can it become part of the existing AFO? Or the third option is like it can be both. It can be a relatively independent standalone ontology, but meanwhile it can become part of the AFO. So this, yeah, definitely these options, yeah, we would like to discuss with the Allotrope Foundation. And also, we for sure we like to incorporate into AFO somehow, and the thing is the restriction, right? I mean, if it become part of AFO, it will be subject to governance and requiring permission, resources, and a lot of things are there. So, and if we stand alone, it will be relatively independent, but maybe it can be both. But anyway, just some discussion to come. Yeah. So overall, thank you very much, and we do like to acknowledge the financial support from Merck to the University of Michigan for this collaboration. It's my great pleasure to work on this with the wonderful foundation and the Merck people, and especially Wes. Thank you.